Okay, we're in chapter 15. This is going to be part 1, and we're going to be looking at, in chapter 15, ocean, shorelines, and shoreline processes. The picture here shows the white chalk cliffs near Normandy, France. And two features I'd like to point out that we were going to be talking about. The first feature I'm circling right here is a sea arch, and this feature right on the side is a sea stack. Now, we've talked about the distribution water on the earth, and we do know that most of it is in the oceans, 97.2%, and that water resulted from volcanoes early in the Earth's history. We have 4 oceans. We have our Pacific Ocean, we have our Atlantic Ocean, we have our Indian Ocean, as well as our Arctic Ocean. Now, anytime you see the word sea, that just means a marginal part of the ocean. The word shoreline is used to denote the area between the mean low tide and the highest level on land that's affected by storm waves. It is in this particular area that you're going to have that interaction of the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the atmosphere. Now, salinity is one way that we actually measure the dissolved solids in seawater, and we commonly express it in parts per thousand. You can see there's 2 ions that make up about 85.6% of those found in seawater, and that is sodium and chlorine. So that salinity is going to vary anywhere from 32 to 37%, sometimes could go as high as 40%. The sources of these dissolved ions are runoff from our continents, as well as could be volcanic outgassing at our hydrothermal vents. Now, what we notice is that the seawater salinity is in dynamic equilibrium, which means as I add ions, they're going to be balanced by the removal of ions. We can remove ions by precipitation of evaporite minerals, by salt sprays near the coast, by the inorganic precipitation of carbonate and clay minerals, and also by the precipitation of shell material by organisms. If you notice the photo on the right, we divide our ocean into 2 layers. We have the top layer that I'm circling is known as our photic zone. That's where sunlight's going to penetrate. So that's where your plants are going to photosynthesize. And it's usually less than about 100 meters in depth. The next layer I'm circling coming down is the aphotic zone, and that is where sunlight's not going to penetrate. And then our deep ocean layer that we've talked about before is our abyssal zone. Now, we know that our surface currents are driven by our wind, but what about our ocean circulation? And in our ocean circulation, we see what's called a gyre. And a gyre is a system of ocean currents that rotate clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. That deflection is caused by the Coriolis effect that we mentioned earlier. So the gyres are what's going to help transfer heat across the latitudes and help control the regional temperature. You can see, looking at this figure at the bottom of the slide, how your red arrows are your warm currents, your blue arrows are your cold currents. And you can see the circulation pattern depending if those gyres are in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. Now, our deep ocean circulation is driven by both the temperature and the salinity of seawater. So we could have what's known as upwelling occurring, and that's this first picture on the bottom left. So upwelling is when you have that slow circulation of our ocean water from depth to the surface. So it's actually transferring nutrients into your photic zone. The picture on the right shows downwelling, and that is when we're transferring the ocean surface water to depth. If we look at our deep sea sediments, we find that they're mostly silt and clay-sized particles, and they come from wind-blown dust and volcanic ash. They could also come from the shells of microscopic plants and animals from our near-surface waters. They could come from particles from chemical reactions in seawater, as well as from cosmic dust. Our deep sea floor sediments, we have what's known as our pelagic clays. These are coming from the continents and the islands, and they're going to be brown or red in color, and they're composed of clay-sized particles. You can see the picture on the left showing that brown pelagic clay deposit. Our oozes are going to be our deep sea sediment that's composed mostly of shells of marine animals and plants. And we have two types. We have our calcium carbonate, which is our calcareous ooze, and we have our siliceous ooze. So in our calcareous ooze, we have the skeletons that are made up of calcium carbonate. In our siliceous ooze, we have the skeletons that are made up of silica. So the top right is our calcareous, the bottom is our siliceous. We also find reefs. So reefs are basically mound-like, wave-resistant structures, and they're composed of the shells of marine organisms. We commonly call them coral reefs. So they will have a very solid framework of the skeletons of corals, clams, and other encrusting organisms. Now, there are some requirements for carbonate reefs or coral reefs. They are typically found in your shallow tropical seas. You need clear water, and the water temperature has to be above 20 degrees Celsius. They're usually not found at depths of more than 50 meters because corals rely on what's known as a symbiotic photosynthetic algae. So symbiotic is a mutually beneficial relationship. So basically the corals get benefit from the algae get benefit from the coral. So it's a mutual beneficial relationship that happens. Now there are different types of reefs. We can have our fringing reefs. So your fringing reefs are going to be attached to an island or a continent. Like you can see this first picture in the bottom left. They are going to be roughly table-like surfaces, and they have a steep slope to the seafloor. Your barrier reefs, on the other hand, which is shown by the middle picture, there's always going to be a lagoon that separates the reef from the shore. And then the last picture shows an atoll, which is an oval or a rounded reef, and it's surrounded by a lagoon. So an atoll will form around a subsiding volcanic island. Now, like we mentioned before, the shoreline is the area between mean low tide and the highest level on land affected by your storm waves. Your coast is going to include the shoreline as well as an area of infinite width seaward and landward of the shoreline. And your shorelines are modified extensively by tides, by waves, as well as near-shore currents. So the picture on the bottom right shows the shore, shows the coast, and also the shoreline. This picture in this slide shows the shoreline of the Pacific coast in the United States. So waves are breaking along that shoreline, and they will form your sea cliffs. Okay, so this ends part 1 of chapter 15.